Imagine all the people living in a world of peace. Imagine it's March 7th, 1965. 600 African-American citizens lined up behind John Lewis, leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they were marching from Selma to Montgomery. It began, they set out, they were protesting for voting rights and against violence, against the death slaying of Jimmy Lee Jackson. Jackson, a local young man and veteran, had been shot by a state trooper when they broke up a rally in nearby Marion, Alabama. You know, back then that wasn't newsworthy, that received no coverage. However, the release 3 days earlier of two white Unitarian ministers, Gordon Gibson and Ira Blaylock, and a white Catholic lay theologian, well, that actually had made headlines. The Sunday of the march, when the protesters reached the William Pettis Bridge, they were tear gassed by the Alabama state troopers. You've seen the pictures. Then the local white vigilantes came in on horseback, swinging their truncheons and batons and charged. And soon the whole world knew. At 4:57 a.m. on Monday morning, Martin Luther King Jr. dispatched a telegram calling for all faith traditions to send clergy to join the citizens of Selma in another march. Among them who received it, to whom it was sent, was the UUA president, Dana McClain Greeley. And among those who responded to the call were James Reeb, Orloff Miller, and Clark Olson. Now, James Reeb was leading housing program for the American Friends Service Committee in Boston. He was living in Dorchester, where his children were enrolled in predominantly black public schools. He was immersed in this grassroots effort of empowerment of African-American citizens. That Sunday evening, Reeb and his wife, Marie, had dinner with Ted Webb. Ted Webb was the UUA Mass Bay district executive. Together, they had watched the newsreel of the attack. Orloff Miller was the UUA director of UU College Centers. He and his wife, Mary Jane, were at dinner with an interracial couple. They too watched the slaughter on TV. Monday morning, when the call came to Miller, who was on the 6th floor of 25 Beacon Street, he rushed down to meet with Homer Jack. Homer Jack was the director of the Department of Social Responsibility. Homer handed Orloff the telegram. In the margins, Dana McClain Greeley had written, "See if Homer would alert some of our men to go and tell Webb." Soon they were working on the phones. They were working the phones all day. UUs were preparing to go, as were Catholics and Jews and Episcopalians and Lutherans and Methodists. Today, what we assume that the outpouring of support and the rush to Selma was because of the righteousness of the cause and the magnitude of the injustice. But that doesn't fully explain the response. Of course it was because of the cause, but it was relationships that compelled them to go. The connection of one person to another. Martin Luther King Jr. and Homer Jack had known one another since 1954, when Jack and two other colleagues had been among the first whites to go to the South from the North to offer their support to the bus boycott. That summer, Jack returned to preach for Dr. King's congregation on Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Then in 1957, they traveled to Ghana together for independence celebrations. Jack visited King in the hospital in New York after King was stabbed. Martin Luther King also knew UU Gene Reeves and personally called him and asked Gene to come. It was Ted Webb who called Jim Reeb and asked him to come. They had dinner together the night before. It was probably Greeley who called Brad Greeley, because Brad Greeley was Dana's nephew. Brad Greeley then called his colleague in Concord, Arthur Jellis. He asked, "Shall we go?" And they went. Olaf Miller was the director of the Office of College Centers. He called Jack Taylor in Champaign-Urbana. They had been classmates. Indeed, King and Taylor and Miller and Reeves had all attended Boston University School of Theology. Do you see a pattern here, perhaps? For others, it wasn't a matter of being called. Actually, they were sent. David Johnson in Bloomington, Indiana, arrived at church for a meeting and was told by his board, "You're going to represent us, and here is the money." By midnight, he and another church member were in the air. Johnson was not the only one sent. And still others like your minister, John Isom. Well, he went for Reeves' memorial service. Aaron Gilmartin, who'd been here 20 years earlier, was there as well. Prior to the conclusion of the march, which was weeks later, the march to Montgomery, the members of the congregation in Park Forest, Illinois, challenged their minister, David Bumbaugh, to go. He said, "They listened to my reasons for not going and informed me they had an airplane ticket and asked would I use it. I knew that this decision would shape my life, and I said yes." And along with 4 or 5 members of the congregation, we flew to Alabama. Do you see the bridge? The bridge is relationships. I mean, what do you do when someone says go? Go for us. Go with us. It's about being in relationship. And so I ask you, with whom are you in relationship? With whom are you in relationship? Who is it that might call you and say, "Shall we go?" And you would say yes. So too often we credit the righteousness of the cause. We make believe it's about some ideological commitment, right belief, and moral courage. But that does not explain what happened. What do you do when your friend calls and said, "I'm going, join me"? The circumstances for Clark Olson, who was walking beside Reeb, and it was Reeb, Olaf Miller, and Clark Olson walking together. Well, when all three were attacked in Selma, it was similar for Clark. I mean, he heard of King's call on the radio. He was in Berkeley, but couldn't figure out how he was going to get the money to get to Alabama. By the time he got home, a congregation members, unbidden, had left the message that they would buy the ticket for him. What happened? What was the bridge? What I want you to think about is, with whom are you in relationship? Who is it that might call you and say, "Shall we go?" And you would say, "Of course." So I will tell you something else about those who went to Selma to cross the William Pettus Bridge, not knowing what awaited them. Clark Olson and Bill Jones. Bill Jones would become the foremost black humanist theologian in America, built a relationship working together as student ministers. Gene Reeves knew Martin Luther King from Boston University and later worked with Coretta King in Alabama. Jack Taylor was Howard Thurman's assistant. Howard Thurman was one of the foremost African-American ministers in mid-century. He worked for Howard Thurman as his assistant at when Thurman was the dean of Marsh Chapel at Boston University. In 1942, Homer Jack had been one of the founders of the Congress of Racial Equality, which was completely interracial. Fred Lipp, who went even though a board member told him it might cost him his job. But Fred Lipp had attended Tuskegee during the junior year in college. Viola Liuzzo was not only a member of the NAACP, but her best friend was Sarah Evans, a black woman. See, theirs were not casual relationships to African Americans. So today, when I ask, with whom are you in relationship, I'm not talking about who is already here. I'm talking about who's not here. That is, with whom do you socialize? What does your friendship network look like? What's their class, their culture, their race, their language? Is it different than your own? To whom have you built bridges? To whom do you want to build bridges? I mean, what relationships might make a difference in your life, might even transform your lives? Flying into Alabama from California, Clark Olson arrived late but caught up with his colleagues, and after dinner he was walking beside Orloff and Reed when they were attacked. Now ask Clark today why he went, and he puts it succinctly. I tell you exactly. He says, I decided to go. I decided to go. But see, the why that gets offered later as an explanation for going, I have to tell you something. It's a guess. It's an approximation. It's a hunch. It's a rationalization, and is always secondary to the decision itself. It is about deciding to go. It's about showing up. It's not about being deliberative or careful or rational. It really was about feeling compelled. I cannot know what will call each or any one of you to action. You know, is it immigration reform or violence reduction or the environment or mass incarceration or disability rights or state-sanctioned violence against, Michael Brown and Eric Gardner and Eric Courtney Harris and Walter Scott or Freddie Gray or Tanisha Anderson or Christian Taylor? Yes, Black Lives Matter. Muslim lives matter too. Hispanics' lives matter as well. What it's about is about those who society oppresses. Their lives matter too. What I know is that when this bridge is there, when this connection is there, a meaningful relationship exists, then you're compelled to act. Without it, the pull is to remain an observer. Outraged, certainly. Dismayed. But still one who gesticulates rather than acts. I can't know when a Selma will arise again. Neither can any of you. But I can give you the names of more than a dozen UUs who helped found NAACP chapter branches or chapters of the Urban League or CORE, as Edna Griffith did here in Des Moines. In the South, they started human relations councils. I can tell you the names of dozens more who were members of the local boards. Whether the connection is institutional or personal, they had relationships to African Americans. And so the bridge was there, and when the time came, the decision was easy. It was I don't want to say easy, it was automatic, even if they were terrified. So, my question is not just with whom are you in relationship, but what's getting in the way of making that commitment? I know it takes a little courage to step out of our comfort zones, which we have actually built into fortresses. It takes some courage because, if we're honest, the unknown is always a little scary. Venturing into unfamiliar settings, it's inevitably we're going to feel off balance, not at ease. Situations beyond our control, we don't like them. Rules which we're not certain about, they make us anxious. This is all transparently obvious. Doubt then eats at us. And I have to tell you, that's good. And it's important. Being careful and cautious and hiding our vulnerabilities is not a recipe for change and transformation. Why do we come to church? To be transformed. But for that to happen, you must commit and engage. And let the awkwardness and the anxiety and the relationships reach in and change you. You can turn difference into dialogue, confusion into understanding, distance into camaraderie, but you have to stop making excuses and engage. Act instead of lament. Take the risk. You can because you have the support of this beloved community. With community as a resource, the feelings of reluctance and sense of vulnerability and doubt and dilemmas you will face and the ways you will get wounded, and you will get wounded. Make no mistake about it. But they can be transformed and used to heal oneself and the world. But with whom are you in relationship? A relationship that might compel you to take that risk. So, first Sunday in December last year, I was preaching to the Netherlands UU Fellowship in Amsterdam. During the sharing of joys and concerns, Bill, an older Euro-American male who'd lived in Holland since the 80s, got up and he lit a candle for Ferguson and Michael Brown. And I was surprised and I was touched. And when I told Bill, so after the service, he said, "My 3 grandsons are black." When someone is that close to you, the risks no longer matter. In the context of relationship, the risks are secondary. When the other comes your sister, your brother, your friends, your grandsons, you will feel compelled to act. And the wider your circle of friends, the more often that's going to happen to you because you've expanded the boundaries of your hearts. Because we act, because we care. So, with whom are you in relationship? And what about your relationship to yourself? Place yourself in situations where friendships can evolve. That's all I'm asking for. Do that, and when you act on the behalf of justice, you will not be acting for others, but with them, and for yourself. The outpouring of support and the rush to Selma was, of course, about the righteousness of the cause and the magnitude of the injustice, but more important was what preceded that moment of injustice, what preceded that moment of decision. For those who lived in Selma, relationships gave them courage and strength. For those who came, relationships compelled them to go. Again, it was the connection of one person to another. Placing the cause first can lead you astray, and ideological commitments will certainly lead you astray because they prize right belief over right relationship. Not by any means necessary. No, not by any means necessary. For the end will always be a manifestation of the means. Being in a relationship and working together to address a problem, that's different. It creates a space. It creates a creative, shared, non-ideological synergy from which alternatives can spring forth, and you find solidarity in working in common cause with others, which is what happened for a time in Selma, Alabama in 1965, and can happen again today. Such a commitment is fueled by a yearning for meaning in your life, or turning it around, actually, your need to make meaning of your lives. Conscience urges us on, for we are dreamers, dreaming of a better, more just tomorrow. Imagine. Yes, imagine. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Whenever my life ends, when I am ash, I want the comfort of knowing I poured out my time and energy. I poured out my substance. I poured out my life for what I valued and those I love. It's about being in love with one another. It's about being in love with oneself and this world to which we are wed. Being in love, we take whatever risks are necessary. That is what living fully and deeply and with integrity demands. Not standing on the side of love, but being compelled by love.